It's a quick update on the EMDR posts, sort of comments on my first session. Things kind of happened very quickly. I was, I think, on a waiting list probably for over maybe the best part of maybe close to 2 years or a year and a half, and I certainly got a phone call and a voicemail to say there's an appointment available, and it was for the following day. So and there's total understanding with the, which I mentioned before, the lack of resources, and perhaps also the not many therapists or trained EMDR therapists are available right there to be used. So and before I had all these questions, which I mentioned in my last previous vlog about, whether it's right for me, and it was interesting. He seemed to address that without me having to ask him. He was just the first session was more of like an assessment and feeling out stage, which I didn't expect. I thought it would be quite sort of rigid in its treatment, but it's I kind of had to just try and explain what was going on, current triggers, and it was really, that was triggering a little bit because of my difficulty in explaining and being clear. And so I did my best in that time, and I actually travelled out of the city to an hour away to find a quiet space to be at my brother's place. So he kindly mentioned that if I travelled that far to do that, then perhaps I could see him in person, which is maybe an hour away as well, in a different direction. But I've kind of our next sessions for the following week, and his initial impressions when I tried to explain some of my just moments in childhood and sort of difficulty in current situations, such as social triggers or my energy around that. He says, perhaps his initial impression is it may not be PTSD, and something I'll ask him next week is if he's distinguishing or differentiating complex PTSD within PTSD, or if he just means PTSD. I don't know enough whether it's often coupled like that, where one's included into the other, but that's something I may ask him. Also, I may bring a document I wrote maybe over a year ago or more. I started writing it. It's just documented symptoms and what I find difficult, and so it's quite a long document. And I wrote that specifically for situations like this, I guess, where I wouldn't have to rely on my current state to explain myself and to sort of speak up for myself to get help. It was it's more so that document would speak for me, would have everything there, and it wouldn't be a case of how I would have to remember things or be worried about forgetting things, which I was during the session, but I didn't realise it would be a bit more of a thorough sort of questions or sort of assessment of me. And so he did also say that even though he may have those impressions that there is sort of trauma there, but it kind of manifests in different ways. For some people it may manifest as PTSD, and for others it manifests in different ways. That was nice perhaps to have a little bit of acknowledgement that there's trauma there, because that word is not usually acknowledged or used. And he did ask actually that, because he had a record of previous treatments I did, and how trauma or PTSD was never ever mentioned. And I guess partly it was my understanding of my symptoms. I guess I didn't perhaps categorize it as PTSD until, as I shared with him, I went on the Mind website and looked at the definition of complex PTSD and went down the bulleted list and really resonated with everything that was said. And that's something I mentioned to him when he asked me, why do you think you have that, or tell me more about how you came to that sort of conclusion. And I mentioned a document to him in session, so I'm going to bring that with me, and maybe I'll look at it perhaps beforehand to see if there's any additional things I need to write, such as recent symptoms, the recent sort of triggering reactions in my body that I've been having. So I guess my goal is just to make sure he has the clearest picture on my health, so he can make an accurate assessment. Because there's that fear and what's happened so many times before, where it feels like I've almost undersold myself or really not spoken up for myself. And unfortunately, it's not a case of where the kind of practitioner will really, notice that and sort of delve into that, say, is that everything there is? And it's kind of all down to me to kind of almost be able to clearly express, and that's one of the difficulties. So that may be, I think that's in the document anyway, actually, that I find it really hard to express my symptoms and explain myself. So perhaps that's a helpful start, to bring that with me next week and to see how the sessions go. It seemed really positive that he was really open, that despite his early impressions, he was like, I'm still sort of willing to, do some more sessions and work with you and see if this treatment is right for you, and explore a bit more about what's going on. So that sounded quite nice. That there was sort of space for more sort of conversation and understanding. And it just it reminded me of the sort of psychiatrist appointment I had for a lot of money that and it was just a 45-minute session, and then that was it, for almost like a diagnosis for stuff, or that was the only sort of session I'd have to be sort of assessed psychiatrically. And I just thought that it's so difficult to get a full picture in that small amount of time, especially when where there's a lot to talk about and explain, and a lot of stuff just may not get shared in the first session. So I'm glad in this instance there is sort of, for the time being, I think taking it session by session just to see how things go. So that's really positive. He did mention to me that if he comes to the conclusion that what I have, or my symptoms don't manifest as PTSD, then there wouldn't be any treatment I wouldn't be able to do the EMDR, just because it's so in demand at the moment. There's such a big waiting list, as I said, about the duration I've been on a waiting list, and it can't afford to sort of allocate treatment for people, even though EMDR might be helpful for people who may not have that sort of traditional or the main symptoms of PTSD, that they just can't allocate the time for that. So I completely understand, he mentioned that. So so that's the current status of that. So I think the great thing is I felt a little bit at ease after talking with him and not meeting him, but just having that interaction with him. Because I find with any sort of therapy and being interacting with therapists, you do need to feel sort of comfortable with them, and so that's something as well. I struggle with male therapists. Every sort of counsellor I've had I've always requested a female therapist. So it's interesting that obviously I don't have a choice in this instance. So maybe it's a good thing just to see how that goes. And my initial energy is that he seems, I feel safe in that energy, fairly safe. So that's a positive as well. And hopefully I'll record another update after my next session and see how that goes. And just I hope kind of things going forward, that this, for people who are dealing with PTSD and don't have sort of financial access to get it privately, that this becomes a bit more available for people, because I think he was just saying that it's such an in-demand treatment. So many people that probably need it and need help, and it's just a long waiting list at the moment. So I really feel for those who are really sort of going through it and really sort of hanging on almost to wait for this. So and I wonder how, I guess because in the UK it's like the national sort of health service, so it's sort of very fortunate that there is availability like this, and knowing that a lot of other countries it isn't that case. A lot of it's private or health insurance, and so definitely sort of grateful just to have access to things, and despite the understandable waiting times. But maybe that's just a note for kind of therapy sessions, that it really helps sometimes to have stuff written down, maybe beforehand. I find that helpful, like the document I'm going to bring next week, that will be really helpful for me, and it's so that's something to that's something to keep in mind for the future as well. And maybe even having like a pen and paper, just if you need to jot stuff down, that could be useful also. And it may just be a question that you don't want to forget as he's talking. So as a therapist talking, so those things can be helpful. Maybe I'll end this here and make this more just about the update for the EMDR sessions, and I might do a separate recording for just general chit chat, general mental health feelings for today might be better.